5 meters from the finish line at this point. And I'm going to make this fast. As a commentator, I understand that my task is first to discuss the practical applications of this important research study that we've just heard about, and secondly, to reflect on how the research community can better influence policymaking in these areas. The researchers have done a fantastic job of laying out the policy implications or recommendations of their research, and so I'm just going to endorse and highlight a few that particularly resonate with the work that WIGO does. And WIGO is Women in Informal Employment, Globalizing and Organizing, which undertakes research and advocacy in many cities around the world, including in Accra. And in my brief comments, I'd like to put a bit more emphasis on the informality of labor relations rather than enterprises, because I think this is where policy attention is sorely lacking. First, the main argument in the presentation is in line with existing literature and with the reality that not only are there different degrees of formality in enterprises, but that workers also straddle the formal and informal economies. So you may have a government clerk who has a small kiosk in front of her house selling provisions, or a banker who operates a catering service from her kitchen. Again, we see increasing informalization of labor relations even within formal institutions and places of work that we would consider to be formal. I conducted research with some colleagues on the banking industry and found that work conditions for some category of bank workers resemble those more commonly found in the so-called informal sector. And of course, this is part of the global phenomena that we call precarious work. So this informalization of formal sector work, such as banking, is predominantly seen in regards to urban livelihoods, and I think that this is something that we need to pay attention to. And this fuzziness in informal and formal means that it's more challenging to make policy, since one does not have a clearly delineated group of enterprises or workers to target. So in order for us to have policies that make sense and that are effective, we need to acknowledge and appreciate this messiness. And here is where we need more research that tries to grapple with this kind of messiness and complication. And for a start, I would say that for policy, we need to wean ourselves as researchers and policymakers from reliance on the concepts of the formal and informal sector, which is the basis of much socioeconomic analysis, and embrace the complexities of urban enterprises and employment. Secondly, WIGO's work endorses the idea that the mindset of policymakers, and I will add many researchers, needs to change. As Tony mentioned at the top of his presentation, in much of policy discourse and even in academic work, informal work is criminalized, or at best presented as antithetical to the functions and aesthetics of a proper city. So in Accra, for instance, we have the periodic clearing or relocation of traders into nooks of the cities where they are hidden and unable to connect with their market. There's also the persistent narrative that informal workers do not contribute revenue to the city because they do not pay formal income taxes, something, by the way, that many middle class and wealthier members of our society do not do either. If we had policies that recognize that the majority of residents in African cities make their living in the informal economy, as we've heard, and if we formulated supportive fiscal, spatial, employment, transportation, and housing policies, that would be great progress in improving our cities and the welfare of their residents. And this is a point, happily, the report makes and buttresses with very specific policy recommendations that I would encourage you to read in full. But I would still say that we still do not know nearly enough about the lives and the work and the movements of informal workers in our cities. And the research studies that have been presented here are indeed a good start, but I'd like to call for even more policy research into the informal economy and the lives of informal workers to understand their dynamics and their diversity, as Nandini's part of the presentation discussed. Urbanization is complicated and the informal economy is complicated because human beings and human behaviors are complicated. And I'll say again that we need more research that is willing to grapple with these complications, with these complexities and nuances so that we can have the kinds of cities that we want. So I would like to thank the researchers for this important work, and thank you all for staying with me on this.